And I looked down at that a couple of times during the weekend, and it just reminded me like nothing really is given. You have to earn everything in Warhammer, and you can't just take wins for granted. So I looked down at that and I thought, you know what? I'm going to give it my absolute best shot here to go to get a draw.
And welcome back to Fireside 40k, everyone. This is episode number 16. And this is our recap of the international team tournament that me, Dave, and another 3 members from our team attended. We played as part of Team Dice Down, and we're going to go through our games, go through some of our thoughts on kind of our experience and also where we feel the meta sits. This is our first event of this season of 40k and our first Arcs of Omen event as well. And it was really interesting to see kind of what armies actually rose to the top compared to what we were discussing about before. Dave, any opening thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I think going into this, we were pretty realistic about our chances. You know, we had a team of 4+1. We had Brian Seep join us, and spoiler alert, Brian ended up crushing it with his iron hands. And then we had Jim and Boris, who kind of stepped out of the game for a little bit, come back into it. And I think, well, spoiler alert again, we ended up going 4-1, losing to the best team there, well, one of the best teams there. And I think that's kind of bang on what we were predicting, right? So all in all, it was a fantastic event, and it was nice to have to like play to scrap for points as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, last time we did mention that this event is a little bit different to most team events. There are fixed boards for every single round, so that variable is removed. So really it was kind of like 5 singles games where you had a little bit of control over pairings going on. So I think the data was very useful for us moving forward into some of the singles super majors that are coming up.
Yeah, it was a good testing round to get some matches and against other armies, and for me, putting my army on the table for the first time. You always can play on TTS as much as you want, but when you put it on the table for the first time or play a tournament for the first time, you kind of learn a lot more in some ways than playing on TTS. So yeah, it's nice.
For sure. And Dave, you're also going to be touching a little bit on your thoughts going into your first single super major. I won't be attending, but that's the Southampton super major. Is that right?
Sure is. I've got a chance at winning. Vik's not coming, so we'll see how it goes. Yeah, we'll touch on that towards the end, guys. But without a doubt, let's kick it into the round 1. So there was 64 teams attending, 5 players in each, and I think the top teams were Team Poland, Team England, and I think our team was probably up there with the top kind of 3, and then people that were around our range as well, because I think Poland and England were the 2 clear front runners, like Team Netherlands and Mind Goblins, who for some reason didn't hit any of the top teams again and just cruised on through to the not cruised on through, that's disrespectful, but yeah, didn't play any of the top teams and then got into the finals again, which is the same thing that happened to them last year.
Yeah, fantastic. It works out. It's to win the games.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. So
we also had Vanguard Tactics and War Masters in attendance as well. Yeah, so a big variety of really good teams. Team events have become more and more popular, and this really showed it. 320 players, that's a big team tournament.
Yeah. The next team tournament being Birmingham, which I think is going to be nigh on 100 teams as a capacity, but I think they'll probably get about 80 teams probably.
Sure, yeah. So coming up to the 500 mark is pretty impressive as well.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go through what we brought for the team again.
Sure.
We brought Boris was on World Eaters. Jim was playing just an all-comers Drakari. Brian was on Iron Hands. Vik, you were playing Eldari with Indirect, and I was playing Guard. And we matched into a team called South London Legion, round 1, who are kind of guys that play in my back neighbourhood, actually. So they're a regular bunch of South London players, and they play at like Bad Moon Cafe and whatnot like that, run by Boris. So yeah, that was a nice. It was a nice round 1. I think that we had quite a big list advantage, and obviously against some of the lesser known teams we've got a skill advantage as well, so we ended up taking that one 80-18. But do you remember what your first game was against there, Vik?
Oh, it was interesting. I think both of us had useful games, because this was me playing against Custodes. Now that they've got their really good stratagems back, they can use them multiple times, particularly the transhuman and the turn off all rerolls against a particular unit. And I was playing against Alex, and Alex had Emperor's Chosen, So this could be a tough matchup. I have a lot of mortal wounds in my army, and Alex gets a 4-up, feel no pain against that. He had kind of bricks of 5 of everything, as well as a few Helverins, and it was a really good game. Really lovely guy, and we played it out. At some point in the game, the resources just started to dwindle for the Custodies, and I think Eldar plays so well once they clear a section of the board, and they're so fast to just run away from the section of the board where these slow-moving armies are, that you can end up in the middle of the game kind of like, oh, I can't actually shoot or charge anything. And when you create that situation in the middle of the game, you end up in a strong position. So I pulled out an 18-2 win there, and this is a differential scoring system, guys. So for every 5 points that you win by, you get 1 point on the differential. So a win of over 5 points, so a 6-point win, is a 1 point differential, and you'd win by 11-9, for example. So an 18-2 win is an 8-point differential, so I won by 41 points or more.
Yep. And I played against Votan, which was actually albeit the first time I played against Votan, I think, ever on the tabletop. That's a bit weird. I played against a guy called David as well, so great guy. We just had a ball. Like, one thing I kind of learnt was that my mortars were really good against the bikes, because they only get a 4-up save against them because you're AP1 and indirect. It's just a really easy magnet to shoot, and the bikes are actually fast enough where they can pick up your infantry. The auto win on 6s was fantastic as well. Actually, this game's just coming back to me now. I did go first, actually, and I had my Scout Sentinel fire and fade into the one area he'd put both of his land fortresses. So I just blocked him for 3 turns, and it just became really difficult for his land fortresses to activate, really. Then I charged my Cadia command squad into them like that. I got lucky and hemmed him into the deployment zone a little bit. But that's the cautious thing about playing Votan, is that if you don't put your land fortress in the correct position, then often that can dictate how the entire game can go.
Nice. Yeah, and the rest of our team did really well as well. Jim took a draw against Death Guard. Boris took a win against Blood Angels, and Brian also got a win against a Black Legion list. So we ended up taking that round 82-18, and that was a nice solid start for us. We got warmed up a little bit, and we needed to be warmed up because we were going to be playing one of the top competitors in round 2.
Yes, our luck does not seem to have improved for this tournament. Round 3 last year, we played against Team England. I don't know if the mission was favourable for us on that round, but round 2 Poland, this mission was definitely not favourable for us. I think if we caught them on round 3, the games would have been significantly different. However, on round 2, we're playing Data Scry Salvage, and it's a hold 2, hold 3, which none of our lists are really primed to play. However, they've actually got 3 lists that are very good at it. So just for recapping, Team Poland are playing Harlequins, Dark Angels, Genestealer Cult, Necrons, and Guard. So realistically, they're Harlequins, Necrons, and Genestealer Cult, and even Dark Angels, because it's a really fast speeder list, all want to play on these hold 2, hold 3 missions. So that was a big deficit going into us. Let's just go through my game first. I played against a guy called Victor, and he was on Harlequins. He's kind of like the Harlequin player in Poland. Now, this is an interesting game because the primary is so low, so many points swung at the end of the game, which is a bit unfortunate. I went first and accelerated my Russ and shot into an open boat, into a boat to pop it open, and then I actually Barbican key my Cassican turn 1 to try and split into 2 boats. I did pop one, which is kind of my goal anyway, just to get the early pressure, because as soon as you can disembark them from the boats, the quicker the mortars can kick in. So that went really well on turn 1. He responded by, and then I mortared some stuff off. He responded by actually trying to get his Troop Master into my mortars, and actually Twilight Pathwaying his Skyweavers to get an angle on my mortars as well, which to be honest, I just completely overlooked, which was a mistake. However, he let my Lehman Russ shoot on death, where I could shoot his Troop Master. So I shoot on death, I CP reroll the number of shots, hit 6 shots on my second time, and then CP rerolled a hit roll and managed to get 6 wounds through. Now the Troop Master has like a 5-up invulnerable, and I'm flat 3 damage, so he just needs to fail 2 of these. He makes 5 out of 6 using 2 luck dice, and I was like, oh man, like Victor and I both looked at each other. I was like, man, you really got away with that one. So unfortunately, he still had to charge my mortars, and I could overwatch him on 5s. So I did pick him up in the end. I just needed to get 2 wounds through, but that was quite a pivotal part in the game. Victor was kind of getting closed out of the game when I killed his troop master, because that was realistically one of his only options to get into my mortar brick. But what ended up happening in the game is that because I really struggled to hold 2 of the objectives, we basically both had almost next to no primary. But then there was a huge, massive swing at the end of the game where he just straight up dropped 9 Harlequins into the board and then made a straight up 9-inch charge from deep strike. The reason what this was, there was a little bit of back and forth going here because he had already charged with a bunch of stuff and then he had wanted to go back and then shoot with something he'd forgotten to shoot about. I had already used the CP where I would have otherwise may have used it, and then I just quickly took my models away, not realizing that he still had the 9-inch charge, and I was going to fail morale anyway, so it would have been much better for me to just make that charge longer and stay on one objective and get a 4. Whereas the way that it worked is that I lost 4 points from that, and probably 4 for the next turn, and he actually gained 24 points because it made him get 2 12s. So that was, unfortunately, that was basically the whole swing of the game. He managed to swing about 32 points there, which is swapped it from Victor and I both saying after the game, like, it was looking like a 15-5 to me, to actually being 16-4, 15-5 for him in the end. So huge swings at the end of the game. But it was a lovely game overall. Super nice guy. And everyone from Poland was super lovely to play against.
Yeah, so 16-4, it hasn't quite worked out, didn't match the kind of predictions we were aiming for there. But we also ended up with a few other bad matchups across this game. Fundamentally, Poland were extremely well prepared. They had been practicing a lot for this event, and they brought really strong lists. So, Jim got thrown. Jim is a Drukhari player. He got thrown so deep under the bus here against Pumba. Pumba's one of the judges for UKTC, but he's also a very, very good player, and he plays for Team Poland. He was running a full kind of Raven Wing Dark Angels list. Yeah. And, you know, the Dark Angels did so well at this tournament. It was unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
So representative of what the meta might be in singles. And Pumba took a 20-0 win against Jim, and really we needed Jim to try and get a few points out of this as well. Again, didn't match our matrix.
And then we had Brian, who actually got the 18-2 against their guard player.
Yes,
their guard player was playing like the 7 Russ variant. I think he said he went first, killed like 3 Russes on turn 1. And then had all his Eradicators coming on turn 2 and absolutely bowled him over.
Yeah.
That might have been the fastest game out of all 5 rounds.
And the most exciting and hilarious game was Boris versus Patrick. Now, Patrick is their GSC player, and Patrick is an insane player, like, so incredibly intelligent. And Boris was so amazed by the way he played this game. But essentially, Patrick went first, completely hemmed in Boris in his deployment zone with his GSC, and Boris just wasn't able to dig out of it. The units kept getting replenished on the move block, and Boris ended up losing 19-1 here.
Yeah. That was a good time. Yeah. So we took a bit of an L there. I think on a different mission, things could have been a lot different, but realistically speaking, that better practice players and better lists, and that's what makes a difference in a team game, right?
And for some reason, I ended up playing Necrons again on Data Scry Salvage. So Data Scry Salvage is the mission you never want to play Necrons on, because they do just squeeze out a lot of points, which they otherwise wouldn't, and they reduce your primaries so effectively while also doing their secondaries. So Data Scry is always a good one for them, but I was into Thomas here. Thomas is like a well-experienced WTC player, and he was kind of their highest scoring player in the previous WTC, and he was a gentleman all the way through this game. We had such a fun game. We had it down in our predictions as this would be a draw. I got first turn in this game, which was actually, I thought, I've played this game before against Alex Fennell and I lost it. And I learned something in that game. It's extremely powerful in this mission to put something on the enemy's home objective. Because even if you don't control it, if you're just touching it with any of your models, they're not able to do the tertiary objective where they get extra primary points.
Which is often like 3 points, but minimum 2 really if you're trying to do the action, right?
Yeah, and if you can maintain pressure on this one and keep people's primary down to 0s and 4s, you can actually really lower their primary score overall if they're not able to do the action as well. So that was my game plan going into it. I was going to apply a lot of pressure, get a bit of an alpha strike, remove a lot of his little MSU units. It worked really well, and I had a lot of momentum going through turns 1, 2, and 3. There were a few little moments where it swung a little bit my way, it swung a little bit his way, but essentially when the dust settled, I just didn't have my resources going into the final turn. And, I only had like 1 or 2 models left, and Thomas still had 2 or 3 units left. Yeah. And Thomas was able to take a little swing back to win the game by about 6 points. So it was an 11-9 to him. Yep. Which was okay. It was kind of fair, but in a way, any other mission with that kind of sequence of play, and it's like a 13-7 win to me, which would have been amazing for the team.
Yeah, the mission hitting us a bit brutally in that one, but that's how it be. There's always random elements into anything as well.
Of course, and I think it was a good experience for all of us as well to play the Polish team, and good practice for them as well.
Mm-hmm. And none of us have really played these guys before. I think I've played against Tomas before. On TTS on an online tournament, but other than that, haven't really played against the guys before. So it's lovely, and it's always nice when like 5 nice people playing against 5 nice people, which is the theme for this whole weekend as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're 1-1, round 3. BCB is currently loading.
We were playing against the Stasis Crypt.
The Stasis Crypt.
And these guys were hilarious, weren't they? They were really nice. They were really cool. So we went in, let's see my matchup. So I played against Harry, and Harry was playing guard. Okay, so Harry was really cool. He just wanted to take the models that he really liked. So this was probably our most kind of, we had list advantage matchup.
Yeah.
I think only Matthew Judge, who was playing their knight list, had an optimal list, like a truly optimal list.
Yep.
You were playing against
Custodes, actually.
Custodes, yeah. Like an MSU Custodes list.
Yeah. I think this one was relatively straightforward. I remember the guys saying, "Oh, we got dice down on round 3," which is like, we're in the 1-on-1 bracket right now. But we managed to take this one 77-23.
Yeah, this was the one I remember because Boris was playing against the Thousand Suns player.
Yeah.
And they were just having a laugh. And Boris had done all these moves and he had a really short charge to make.
Yeah.
And he missed the charge with a reroll. And his opponent was just like, it doesn't matter, just put them in.
Just put them in.
Yeah, just put them in, it's fine.
That was Simon, yeah.
Yeah, Simon, yeah, cool.
He was just like, look, win or lose, you're playing World Eaters, just make the charge, it's fine.
Yeah, come on, I want to see if I kill you in combat, you know?
Yeah.
So
good times. It's nice when you get games like that. Good times. Round 4, so that puts us at 2-1, going into round 4. Have you got the tabs already open, Vic, or are you just...
Yeah, I've got it. Cold Steel Mercs. So
Cold Steel
Mercs is Michael Bolton's team. These guys are also super, super lovely as well. They've been talking with some of the Team England guys to get some help with their lists and get them all set up.
Yep.
And looking at the lists on paper, this would be a good challenge for us. I think this is one where Dave, you doing the pairings really helped us out. You managed to kind of hit all the correct pairings across the board here.
Yep.
And you kind of made it so that me, you, and Brian all hit kind of massive wins. So we all got 20 O's in this. Mm-hmm. And once you get that kind of situation, 3 20 O's in a 5-man team, it's impossible to come back, isn't it? So
yeah, exactly. Even 120 O is quite difficult to come back from. Assuming that you're going to get 20 on the other side.
So I played against Mike, and Mike, I play him a fair bit on in the Glasshammer tournaments because he's in the Netherlands.
That's right. Yeah, I remember this.
And he was playing a really cool word bearers list. So when the CSM Codex first came out, word bearers were really stood out because they have very good rules, good secondaries, good relics, good warlord traits. Everything kind of adds up with it. The only problem was they don't quite have the shooting output or the speed of some of the other factions.
Yep.
So he was playing an MSU list with a lot of kind of like little units of combat to make use of the full rerolls to hit.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my army is just completely stacked with 2 damage weapons. So he was just losing so many units so quickly. And his captain had, I think he had come up to the decision. Oh yeah, Alex is the captain, not Mike. Yeah. So Alex had told him, look, you just got to go for it, try and get some points, just go full aggressive. So he just put his whole army in front of me, and his whole army just died.
No. Yeah, and that's kind of similar to the Poland game we had as well, where I was like, I'm in a position here where I could push for like a 17-3, played very, very aggressive. And sometimes when you play aggressive, it also leaves the door open for you to get kind of blown out, right? Sometimes when you get a good position, you can play, okay, we both math this out, it's a 12-8, right? But otherwise you can try and push, and then it creates a lot more swings in the game when you push and play a lot more aggressively.
For sure.
Especially when people know what you're going to do. I played against a guy called Ian, who I played for the first time, playing Custodes again. Let's just say the Cassican were good on this one as well. And super lovely guy, though. Kind of unfortunate mission for him in some ways. But it was a good time overall.
Yeah, nice. And we ended up winning that round 83-17. So this was, I think, our biggest win. It was a very big win.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
nice.
the points were kind of important for the final rankings, so we were trying to push in that sense. So we were both hoping, we were all hoping, like, hope we get a great team to play against in the final round. We get some tough draws and stuff like that. And actually, we hit, in hindsight, a really lovely team.
Yeah, a really good team as well.
6++. If you don't know who these guys are, they run a channel called 6++, where they have a ton of content. They've also got a podcast, 6++. And I've played against Tom Lohman and Lee Churchwell both before as well. So lovely bunch of guys there. They're kind of they're obviously not new, but I think after I actually listened to the episode talking about this as well.
Yeah,
but
I listened to it as well. Really,
they
good.
said events like this wanted to inspire them to actually compete more and become better teams and try and become more competitive as a team, which is awesome to see because they're a super lovely bunch of guys. Like, you get games at tournaments, like these are the type of people that you want to be playing into.
They epitomize the right way to play competitive 40k, where you're trying to be a good player while also just being like a really good human being.
Yeah.
And it's a joy to go to tournaments and play like 5 rounds against people like this. So yeah, props to you guys. This was an awesome set of games, I think, for all of us to finish on.
Probably my favorite round of the whole weekend, I would say.
Yeah, me too.
For me. And what I would say, just plug it once more, this 6++ podcast that they have, if you want to hear it from the other side and have a laugh, then go check out their podcast towards the end of the podcast there as well. But anyway, love you bunch of guys. So they actually had, let's run through their list. Lee was on...
Do you remember the pairings on this? This was quite funny.
Yeah, I do.
They threw us so hard, didn't they?
Yeah. So we kind of had... there's always times in life, I think, where you've got your own idea and then you get some other idea from someone else. You think, okay, all right, maybe that'll work. That'll do that. And then you go, I wish I'd just stuck with my original idea. So I think they actually outpaired us quite well.
I think so.
I think they definitely got the upper end of the pairings for sure. So what ended up happening is we thought that they would go with Dark Angels first. So in that case, we would go with Iron Hands first. What ended up happening is they went with Guard first, and we already had our Iron Hands attacking. So what that meant is we either put Jim maybe under the bus, which actually in hindsight would have been better, and we put Vik forward because Vik is really good into guard. What ended up happening is we put myself and Vik into it. Now, in a team pairing event, I think this is an interesting point when you've got players with uneven skill levels, is that despite the pairings being one way or another, you should also account for trying to get big wins on your top players on the team, like we discussed previously where you, me, and Brian all got 20 O's. Now, whilst the pairing might not be optimal, the leverage of player skill and player skill difference between two players might be large to the point where you're going to get a larger differential regardless of the matchup, right? So what ended up happening is they put guard forward, and we ended up attacking with Vik and I. Now, their reasoning was super sound here. They just said, look, Lee's played the guard mirror like the day before or something like that, and he just thinks it's a coin flip. Flip a coin, boom, done. So he picked me, and I was like, okay. I actually hadn't played the guard mirror yet, so I was like, oh, okay.
Ooh, this could be spicy, yeah.
But I was really excited to play it because I was like, man, this is going to be such a great learning game. And Lee and I have played before. He was playing Chaos Space Marines, I was playing T-Suns. So I knew he was a great opponent as well. So I was super excited going into it.
But we did think he was going to pick me, right?
We did, but they knew that was a bad matchup.
Yeah, see, that's rare.
Yeah.
I think when you look at it on paper, you don't realize that the Eldar can compete.
Yeah,
you think,
sure.
Eldar, I have mortars, it's fine. But
yeah, but it's funny because their attitude is, look, they just take a coin flip against one of our top players and then, it's like go first and then blow me off the board, right? Which did happen, so we'll go into that later. Brian got paired against GSC. They thought this matchup was okay on paper, but Brian knew that it was
Yeah.
almost close to a 20-0. Like the Gladiator Reaper and the Contemptor just go absolutely berserk. in this
Brian was
matchup.
happy with that one.
Brian was happy. Poor Jim.
Oh man.
Jim got Dark Angels again and lost 20-0. But he said after the game that actually if he had played a little bit differently, he could have scraped a lot more points.
Yeah, I think so with Dark Angels, guys, the key is if they have a lot of these Terminator units, they're actually slow, but they can be deceptively fast in certain situations. So if you're trying to score your secondary points, and let's say you grab engage or behind enemy lines and put a unit like deep near them, what they can do is make charges with their whole army into that one unit and get plus 2d6 movement and then 6 inches of pile in and consolidate. So you can end up in a situation where you've just put one unit in their deployment zone and they're in your deployment zone after the charge.
And they also have do they have the litany where they get +2 to consolidate and pile in or something?
+2 to everything, so and including the charge. So
potentially charge and move 10 inches with your unit that is already going to activate because the other one kills it first.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a bit brutal. And Jim did make that decision, and it ended up with him just having no game at all into Paul's Terminator list.
That's the type of game where you make the mistake once. And Jim said afterwards as well, bless him, he said, I shouldn't have put my Reavers there. Gave him so much space. But then we had you versus Chris.
So this was an interesting one. I think what happened is Chris had a choice of me and Boris, and they wanted. Oh no, it was something else. But basically, Chris didn't realize that the Harlequins have a decent game into both the Iron Hands and the World Eaters, and missing that, he kind of didn't get himself paired into one of those two, which was very achievable at this stage of pairings. So it ended up being Chris taking me out of the pairings and putting it into him, and playing Boris against their Tau list. And I think we got the upper hand on that little exchange because. It's an interesting one. The game against Chris was really, really fascinating for me because I had it down in my matrix as near to a draw. And the reason for that is when the Harlequins do have their 4+ invulnerable save, they end up with a lot of these like little 1 or 2 like models here and there, and they're able to just grind out the points, primary denial, and grab their secondaries. But what I didn't realize is that with only a 5+ invuln, just how quickly they disappear off the board.
It's a lot quicker.
So I was playing the game through, and it's probably a decent time to talk about it. And me and Chris were playing it, and we both were talking about it. I told him what I'd put it down in my pairings, because I know Chris really well. I've played him multiple times, and we're just having a chat and a learning game as well. And I told him, look, I've got this down as a draw. And he was like, I don't really see it. I feel like, you're just going to kill me. And then he started doing the points. I said, look, on the board, you kind of do this, and you'll be able to eke out a draw. And so we were playing for this draw. And then all of a sudden, I get this message come down to me. I'm on the last table.
Yes.
And
this is in relation to my game.
No, it's all of the games, Dave. It wasn't just yours.
I
So you had started off the message by saying, oh, it's looking bad.
Yeah.
And then you passed it down the line, and Jim was next to me, so I already knew his one was bad. But Brian was like, okay, this is good. Brian's doing okay into the GSC, but he's not sure what the score is going to be.
Yeah.
Boris, he's stuck and doesn't know how to get to the Tau. That's the message I got.
Okay, right.
And so Boris is going to lose. So Jim's losing, Boris is losing, Dave's losing, and Brian's maybe doing okay. And Boris shouted at me Vik, you have to score all the points, something like that. and so I just took my whole army from out behind the ruins, playing this safe game where I'm getting a 12-8, and I just put everything into poor Chris. And Chris even says in his podcast, I just bent him over. He saw the gleam in my eye, and I ended up he had 2 models left on his turn 3. And it was a 20-0 win for the Eldar here. Which is just testament to how much more fragile the Harlequins are now.
Yeah, and it's cool that you've got an army that can turn it on and turn it off in a moment's time, right?
Yeah.
A lot of armies you have to set up, 3 turns in advance to really just your game plan is kind of set from the get-go.
Yeah, of course. And whenever you push like that, like you mentioned before, you open up risks. And the way I was playing it was, it's cool. I just need a comfy small win or a draw here. Yeah. And I was just playing the complete no dice game. But yeah, sometimes you just got to go for it.
Yeah, and Boris with World Eaters took a big win against their Tau player. And I think this is kind of this can kind of happen sometimes where you get something in your head so much that you end up putting yourself in a box. So what happened in the Tau game is Jamie played super defensive, and I was looking at the board state on like their turn 3 or 4, and he had everything castled up in the back of the board, and Boris just had the whole mid board. And I think a lot of that fear came from, the pre-game move, the melee, he's going to hit you at some point, he's going to hit you. And actually, the World Eaters army, aside from the pre-game move, is just a normal Marine army in terms of its maneuverability, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Boris was actually able just to go la-di-da-di-da, school Aura's primary, plant bombs. I think he said he had max primary on turn 3, and then just die and kill stuff for all the secondaries, whereas James couldn't catch up on the primary there as well. And what I said by put yourself in a box, let me go on a bit of a tangent here. When I played the very first LVO, I was playing Crusher Stampede. My opponent was playing, it was round 3, my opponent was playing Custodes, the flavor of the month at the time, and then Imperial Guard with 2 full payload Manticores. And I thought, holy crap, this guy's going to rinse me. Because 2 full payload Manticores can shoot all my Hive Guard, and my Hive Guard are my best thing against him. And then all his bikes, have Melter and are pretty good against all my monsters. And I was like, Jesus Christ, man. But what ended up happening is I mentioned to him, I was like, just be aware, I can double move my Harpies, and I can charge them, of course. At the time, it was like 40 inches or something like that. And my opponent got so caught up with this concept that he actually deployed everything. He wrapped his Manticores with his whole army in the corner of the board. And I was like, well, I can't charge it, yeah. But I got first turn, and all I did was just kill his 10 guardsmen on the other side of the board. And then he was stuck in the corner. And I was like, after my first turn, all I'd done is killed 10 guardsmen. And he went to me and went, this is game over, right? And I was like, yeah, I don't really see how you get back onto the board. Because even his dreadnoughts were in the back, and he was so fixated on me doing one thing that he ruined the potential to actually play his army as well. And I think that's kind of what happened in this game. Not to pick on Jamie at all. I just wanted to have this as a general lesson to people, in general, because it's happened to me as well. You've got to think realistically about what's the trade-off between playing defensively, playing offensively, because ultimately Tau versus World Eaters, you can just shoot World Eaters off the board, right? Mm-hmm. It was angular deployment, which is one of the best shooting deployments in UKTC, and Tau are easily fast enough and have the flat 3 damage, flat 4 damage, where they can just blow World Eaters off the board from range. So I think that was a valuable lesson for everyone to take away from something like that. And if you've found yourself doing that in games, it's the kind of thing that you learn one time, but it's really good if you can reflect sometimes and be like, you know what, realistically, I just had this one thing caught up in my head, and I just need to get it out of my system a little bit.
Yeah, nice, really good good kind of thinking and thoughts about that. And I think it's an interesting one, because protecting against an alpha strike is probably one of the most technically challenging skills in 40k, and being able to do it while exposing the correct number of resources without being too defensive or too aggressive, not being all in on something, is something that takes ages to develop and do correctly, and very few players do it correctly. So
it's very tough. Deployment in general is one of the most difficult things about Warhammer. And the hedging between going first and second, having some payoffs if you go first, some taking some damage if you go second, a lot of things like that. Because your deployment obviously dictates where you can play your first couple of turns, which are ultimately probably the most impactful turns of the game. So deployment's difficult, and that's why Warhammer's really difficult, of course, as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, speaking of deployments, wow. So this is the first time I'd played the Guard Mirror.
Okay.
And so, just for some context, Lee was playing what I would probably call some more of the mainstream Guard type lists, right? He's playing Rogel Dawn, he's playing a Tank Commander, and 3 other Lehman Russes. So he's got 4 Russes and the Rogel Dawn, which is like 1.5 Russes. He's got a Chimera, Cassicans, a couple Mortars, Guardsmen and whatnot like that. And the standard character loadouts and everything. And this is like the vehicle heavy-ish variant, right? Which I think is probably what you see most commonly. Whereas I'm playing my Guard list, which for context is 3 Lehman Russes, 2x3 Armored Sentinels, and 20 Cassicans and Mortars and stuff like that, but 40 troops. So going into this, I knew that I had to Scout Sentinel block one area of the board from his Cassicans, but because of the deployment, I couldn't actually block his Cassicans from everything. Now, Lee going into this thought, if I go first, it's game over. As in, if Lee were to go first, it's completely game over. And I think, realistically, it may be like that as well, because of the way I deployed. And what ended up happening is Lee went first. He has we both have redeploys. He's got all his tanks on the line. He's got angles to quite a few of my things. On turn 1, I lost 10 guardsmen, so 20 guardsmen. I lost a squad of 10 Cassicans. I lost a Lehman Russ. I lost my Chimera. And then inside my Chimera, I lost 5 Cassicans on the disembark. Oh. So I rolled 5 ones out of all my units in my Chimera. So I was like, okay, so that's like roughly, it's basically neutered almost both of my Cassican squads. It's 200 points, Guardsman 130, the Russ is 400, roughly about 500 points on turn 1.
Yeah, that's brutal.
But here's what happened. This actually happened to me more than once on the weekend. I'm going to get a little personal note here. On the weekend, I had my objective markers, which I have gold pens signed from some players. And on one of those objective markers is a signature from a guy called Chase Chamberlain, who I lost to at LVO. And the signature says, "Thanks for the great game, mate, Chase Chamberlain." And I looked down at that a couple of times during the weekend, and it just reminded me, like, nothing really is given. You have to earn everything in Warhammer, and you can't just take wins for granted. So I looked down at that, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to give it my absolute best shot here to get a draw. Because I had lost a lot, and Lee was like, after Lee's first turn, message went down the line, Lee has absolutely cakewalked me. It's going to be a big win. I thought, okay, how can I get out of this? So I think I spent 45, 50 minutes on my first turn. It was very complicated analysis in terms of where I'm putting my full rerolls, where I'm putting my, I lost a Sentinel as well, I think, where I'm putting my orders, and what I'm going to try and achieve in the turn. What ends up happening is, I put my full rerolls on my Plasma Sponson Plasma Tank, and that works out being absolutely brilliant. So what I did is I fire and faded I jumped out with my Armored Sentinels, shot with Ursula Creed +1 to strength, which makes him strength 9 against the Rogel Dawn toughness 9 or the tank's T8. So that's a really big breakpoint because it's +1 to wound, and then Leontis gives him 1 hit and wound rerolls of 1. So take aim, hit on 3s, wound on 3s, reroll 1s. Great. Then my Plasma, what I did is I Barbican keyed my 5 Cassican out, and then I took aim them so that they're hitting on 2s, and I strung them out into Leontis reroll 1s. What ends up happening, and then what I did was I moved my Leontis out into his 10 Cassican that he had left right outside my deployment zone. So I had 2 little guardsmen, I had a squad of 10 guardsmen, I had my KD command squad on Leontis, and my Sentinels. What happened was that I shot one of his tanks, one of my tanks clean killed one of his tanks, which is great. That tank blows up, hits his other tank for 3 mortal wounds. My Cassicans, I then blow the 2 CP on my 5 Cassicans. They kill the other tank, so it's like 10 wounds through the Cassicans. My Sentinels shoot and kill one of his, almost one of his tanks, but it's basically on 2 wounds. My Sentinels almost kills Rogel Dawn. And then the critical part of the game was I wrapped his Cassicans with 5 units of mine. So in the middle of the board, he had 3 Cassicans after all the combat. He rolls the morale, fails it, and then he slow rolls. He fails the first one, and then he passes the second one, thankfully. So this one Cassican is wrapped by like 2 guardsmen, like 5 guardsmen, my Leontis, my Sentinels, and my Cadia command squad. So what it really did was and I cut really tight angles with my other Lehman Russes. So what it did is it made it super hard for him to activate everything else. After that, the rest of the game, his next turn he brings up his tanks, but what ends up happening is that my Armored Sentinels with the Fire and Fade just end up running around the board, tagging into his, shooting his tank commanders, and then wrapping them against walls and whatnot like that, because the base is so big, they can wrap the tanks like really, really well. So what ends up happening is I push super aggressive, because at this point he has a big secondary advantage, because I can't really score the secondaries, because he's neutered a lot of my infantry. So I'm just pushing his primary. My KD command squad, my Leontis are like on his like home objective at the end of the game and everything like that. I've kind of functionally tabled him, but yeah, so it ends up I think he beat me by 2 points, victory points in the end, but it was a 10-10 draw. And yeah, I was just really, it was nice to play a game completely on the back foot and really have to like think through a complete puzzle box turn. It was one of those things where you're like, if everything goes completely right this turn, then all the sequencing, take my time, do everything correctly, then I've got a chance in this game to scrap a draw, and that's where we went through it. So yeah, it was a great game, and like our game went to time. Lee and I chat out like the last turn and stuff like that. Say, I think this and think that. And Lee's a super nice guy, man. There was a couple of points in the game where we were like, oh, I think my intention was to be outside of your mortar range if you move and you're within, and everyone in that team plays just complete gentlemen and go back and be like, no, it's fine, man. Let's play like this way and everything like that, which was great. So it was a huge, really big positive to end the weekend on, I think.
Yeah, sounds like an awesome game, man. And
that was crazy.
Props to you both for a great game.
Yeah. So let's leave it there. That was the tournament, 4-1, and I think after the break we're going to come back with some of our thoughts on the meta, because I think some things were stronger and some things were weaker, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, fantastic. Let's do it.
Catch you guys after the break.
Welcome back, everyone. Here we go. We're going to be doing our little rundown of the meta. We've had a chance now to kind of see things on the board, see how everyone's doing, what's kind of rising to the top, and we wanted to share our thoughts on that. And, I think we should just go straight in at the top. Dave.
Straight in at the top.
Straight in at the top, because
Chaos Demons.
Not again. There's obviously one army which clearly outperformed everything else across this tournament, and I have a feeling it's going to be very strong going forward in this meta. And I'm talking about Dark Angels here.
Oh, Dark Angels.
Yeah. And I honestly, I didn't actually predict that they would be as good as they are. Just looking at it, I thought, yes, they're going to be great. Dark Angels and Iron Hands, that's what everyone's talking about. But I didn't realize just how good Dark Angels would be.
Super dominant. I think they've got a really straightforward game plan. They are going to be an absolute terror because their secondaries are pretty solid, but their data sheets and their overlapping abilities, and I don't want to say point and click nature because obviously there's a lot of nuance to play every army, but I think they're quite direct to play, right?
Yeah, compared to everything else.
I think Iron Hands is probably quite direct as well, right?
Yeah, I think Iron Hands as well. But even then, I think the Dark Angels are so incredibly forgiving.
Yeah.
Because just how cheap everything is. Like, if you just put points into the Terminators, you end up with an army which is you get way too much for your points. And the second you have that, it means that you can make mistakes here and there. And you're like, oh, I still have lots of stuff. I can just kind of carry on and come back into the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the clear front runner. It also won the frontline game. I want to say Cherokee Open. That was the tournament.
Yeah, I think the Dark Angels players beat all the other good players in attendance.
Yeah. In fact, I think the finals was Stephen Crawley, I believe his name is, playing with Death and Glory versus Brad Chester playing Space Wolves at Death and Glory. So that's pretty interesting. And I think I can't remember who Brad played in the semifinals, but I know there was a lot of top players playing in that top 8 as well. And shout out to our boy Adam Camilleri. I actually watched his game versus John Lennon. I rewatched it back a couple of days ago.
Oh, so I've got to give a shout out to Adam as well. So Adam runs a podcast called the Down Under podcast, Art of War Down Under, and he got me on. I'm so happy to do this, Dave. You won't believe. He got me on this podcast to talk about Eldar.
Yeah.
And the joy it brings me that he would reach out to me out of everyone in the world to talk about like my favorite faction. I was so passionate in that podcast. Like I gave him everything for that 2 hours. And part 1 is really good, but part 2, where I go through the matchups, I think it's super insightful for anyone who's interested in Eldar. Yeah. It's not released it probably won't be released at the same time that this podcast is released. You might have to wait like a week or so, but keep an eye out for that one.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Yeah, and Adam's a super lovely guy. A really good example of how you want to play the game as well. Adam versus John Lennon, both actually just straight up gents when it comes to 40k. Okay, so Dark Angels won, arguably, quote, air quotes, won the ITT, won Cherokee. I think it's pretty clear that if you want to win a tournament, you have to have an answer for that type of army, right? Mm-hmm. And what actually makes the Terminators so strong also is, the Transhuman, 4-up invulnerable, 1-up base save, the Apothecary, the Banner means that you can resurrect a guy, you can heal, you have a 6 up for your pain, and you can -1 damage as well, right? So they are the Tyranid warriors of today.
It should be about 45 points with all the upgrades. Thunderhammer, Storm Shield, Cyclone Missile Launcher, right?
Squad of 10 is currently 335, I want to say.
330.
330.
It's 33 points with as many upgrades as you want. So that's Storm Shield, Thunderhammer, and the Cyclone Missile Launcher.
Yeah. I think realistically, they shouldn't be able to field 6 speeders and all the characters and 30 Terminators. It should be like 22-ish Terminators, I think, with that other variance. But really strong. You're going to have to think about how you're going to beat it. And that would be the number 1 army to get some practice against. What would be your second pick, Vic? You can run down the whole meta this time. I'm just going to stand here and criticize you.
So I think there's a little layer below this one. And I think a lot of armies are really kind of close in this layer. Mm-hmm. Now, my second pick is purely because I think they have the best game out of everything into the first pick, into Dark Angels. And I think they have a good game into everything else, like an okay game.
Yep.
And that's going to be Astra Militarum for me.
Yep.
Purely based on the rules. Now, statistically, that is not the case. Tournament wins-wise, that is not the case. And I think Dave's experience, that's also not the case.
Yeah, I've actually found this codex really challenging. Usually, I think, what's a reasonable amount of time to come to an optimal, like pretty optimal list, do you think, Vic? You think it's
10
4
games.
weeks? 10 games, sure. I've played way more than 10 games, and I've played, and I've been iterating for a number of weeks now. Before the codex, well, I actually started looking at it when the codex was coming up. So that to me, and obviously it's subjective, but I think there's a lot of depth in this codex. Depth is maybe not the right word. Depth is the right word, but there's a lot of things that look good on paper, and when you play them and put them into action, you realize that there are some real fundamental flaws to them. The one that strikes me the most is the Lehman Russ. It's got to be, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Now I'm going to call you out here because once upon a time in a chat, Vic said the Lehman Russes need to go up 50 points.
I still think the Plasma Exterminator one does.
Yeah, but the problem is the other guns are pretty bad. The other guns are pretty bad. But so like we talked about in the last episode, my list has gone from 7 Russes and is now at 2 Russes. Because for me, they've got their... For me, they're more like they've got their role now. Whereas previously, I think a lot of players thought you can bully players with them. And I think at the top level, you can't bully someone with a move 10 tank that can get tagged, wrapped, etc., that has some serious problems around inconsistency. And I would group the Rogel Dawn in that category as well. Sentinels are kind of in that category too. So yeah, it's taking a while to figure out. I think on top of that, it's got quite an administrative kind of complexity to it. It's a little bit of a puzzle box. If you're playing the style, which I think would probably be the strongest, which is somewhat close to 80 or 90 troops total, couple of Russes, couple of Sentinels, all the character suites, couple of transports, and you're doing orders outside of transports to enable your army to do things that it otherwise normally wouldn't do.
So the 7 Lehman Russes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a very straightforward army to play. It's threat saturation, and you're winning games where the opponent just can't handle or deal with it.
It's a bit like Votan in some regards, that one.
And I think you're right. That may not be the strongest build, but I think that's the build that will probably statistically get the most success, just in terms of success at tournaments. Now, the builds you're talking about, I think, are the strongest build, but they come with an incredible demand on player skill to play them correctly. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be very interesting because the Imperial Guardsmen are very fragile, the troop units, and playing them correctly and making sure each unit you're actually getting value out of without running out of resources in the mid-game is a challenge.
It's difficult, yeah. It's difficult to make them work, and they are particularly vulnerable to just, they literally just fold over and die. So, yeah, it's interesting. I had a blast playing it over the weekend. An absolute blast playing it. Cassicans weren't anywhere near as broken as I knew they weren't. Well, okay. They are very strong. Very strong. And the stratagem should get nerfed. Yeah. But what my experience is that good players never let you get a really good Cassican bomb against them, right? Some of these top armies like Iron Hands, Dark Angels, even Vik, your list, it's very hard to get. It's very easy to screen against something like that. Even if you have the mortars that are picking off the things that are screening. So yes, they are underpointed, they're too cheap, the stret's too strong, but it's the threat obviously is very strong as well. But
I would say about the Kazakhans is that they're very good into armies that present single big targets that they can't screen. And there's only really one army in the meta, which is Dark Angels, which do that. They can't realistically screen out the full range of the Kazakhin bomb with their Terminator brick. So you will get value there. So the Kazakhin bomb is brilliant, and I think it's going to be defining in the meta, especially with Games Workshop not actually changing them. I think more people are going to be confident to run them in their lists now, and to maybe even build guard and practice with guard. So
So let me say one more thing about guard. Here's the thing I don't like about guard, and I think I've probably said this about other armies before. It's got some elements to it that just completely blank armies. The mortars are either just absolutely brutal, or they're just like 2 damage return or something like that, And then the Kasrkin are very similar. You play against knights, you Kasrkin 2 knights down with Finial, and boom, you kill 2 knights, 100 points, 2 CP, done. So those two combination of things can really just blank armies in what is kind of a non-interactive way, which I don't think is really a positive way to build the faction. But granted, what I would say is that those things are very hard to see, into the future when you're designing the codex as well. Fair criticism, I think, right?
I'm going to keep them at that second place for me, because I think technically, if you do everything perfectly as a player and build your list beautifully, you have the tools to deal with anything in the meta, and that's a recipe for success with practice.
Yep, for sure. No, I would 100% agree with you. And we both see eye to eye on the statistics thing. I think it's going to be one of those armies that has poor statistics, but potentially is one of the, or between the top players, known as one of the scariest codexes.
Yeah. I mean, still within the same top tier, there are a few other factions. I'm just going to go through I think it's 4 factions, and you can kind of give me your thoughts on it. I'm going to go with Iron Hands. I'm going to go with GSC. I'm going to go with Demons and Eldar as well. And with Eldar, I'm going to include not Harlequins, but I'm going to include Eldari Soup and Yanari as those two. And I think all of those are on a similar kind of playing field.
So, counterpoint there really quick. Custodes, Orcs, and Necrons, what do you think?
I think Necrons, I think Custodes, this is a tricky one. Orcs, I need to see more of it.
Yep.
But I have a feeling that all 3 of those factions will end up just knocking in under the 4 that I mentioned before. Yep. Maybe on par with Demons, maybe.
Yep. And this is because, obviously, if you guys don't know, or if you're a new listener, we talk about UKTC here, which is its own terrain element to it as well. Potentially some of these factions are a little bit more stronger on the GW or US Open boards or WTC as well. I think Custodes is definitely a clear one like that. For the Chaos Demons, are you talking about the pure Tzeentch list that we're seeing a bit, or the Slaanesh build, or...?
I think any of those, any of the above, just the ability. So the problem with Orcs and Custodians, and why I'm putting them below, is that you just can't hide everything. Yep. So you're always vulnerable. Harlequins, you can't hide everything. You're just vulnerable on UKTC. And Demons, yes, you can hide everything, which is good.
For sure.
So you can make a balanced list that plays, the output's good, the threat is good. And I think they will continue just to be successful. Whether or not they win tournaments, that's another thing. I think the armies like Eldar, for example, I think they're tournament-winning armies because they have an okay match into everything. And when you add player skill on top of it, the best players will gravitate to the chance to play Eldar whenever they can.
Yep.
And I think they'll be tournament winners, despite maybe not having as strong a list.
Yeah. Pretty sure that's just you at the moment, isn't it?
Well, like in Europe and America and things, we're going to see a lot of Eldar players come back and show success. And Yanari is going to become more popular as well because they have a chance to win tournaments in this current meta.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned, so what else we got? The Demon GSC, yeah. So GSC is, I think, a really good example of an army that I'm gonna put it out there. There is one build for this army. which is 80 neophytes and 3 squads of bikes and all the characters.
It's interesting because I think Eric Latourus from Australia,
from Australia,
he's like a really renowned player, and runs his blog. And in his latest list iterations, he wrote down his theory of why he's not running the bikes, and he's running a completely different list. So it just throws a complete curveball, because there's always creativity. You can jump onto the current best list, but you know, the very, very good players will find ways of creatively using the rest of the codex.
Yep.
So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with GSC. I think they're in a very good place.
Damn, now I look like an idiot. GSC, we've really missed anything? We've got Guard, Eldari. Yeah, I think, you know what I would say is, I think I've said this before as well, is that given all the change, you know, we've had a few months from Arc of Omens now, where arguably the biggest changes for the game update balance-wise have occurred. I think, you know, GW have actually done this one quite well, albeit maybe some tweaks to Dark Angels, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you bring that down a little bit, I think and bring up some armies a little bit, you know, we're on a really even playing field here. And for how many changes they made to the game, you know, good on them, right?
I think we were all very doom and gloom on this.
Yeah.
And I think we were probably a little bit wrong.
For sure.
I think this is not a bad meta, and I would love to see them just make small, quick tweaks to keep on top of things. They chose not to in the FAQ for Guard, which is really interesting. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. I think we're all going to enjoy tournaments still. The game has not been ruined.
No. The game there's still plenty to play, and every victory is earned. I've got Southampton coming up in 2 weeks' time. That'll be a super major down in the south of England. I think a couple of our friends are coming to it, so that'll be good. I'm going to be playing Guard because I'm just having a fun time playing them.
Awesome.
And you know, that's a super important part of Warhammer 40k at the end of the day too, is having fun, enjoying the army that you're playing as well at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I mean, I've probably got my money on people still not taking enough for Dark Angels.
Yep.
And I think still just a small number of people will be playing Dark Angels as well. For some reason, there hasn't been that buzz about it, despite it being so powerful. The only, like, Manny's jumped onto it, and I think this is the kind of meta where Manny strives so hard, where he can run like the best army. He can optimize it. He's a very good list writer. He can optimize it, and then he can, other people are not jumping on the train with him. So I think, you know, he's going into this in a good position, and it'll be interesting to see if, for example, you're going, NASA's going, if you guys can, you know, dethrone him almost from a good start to the season.
I haven't had any luck doing it so far, so
yeah,
let's hope I get it this time.
Best of luck to you guys. It'll be really interesting to follow.
Yeah, sounds good. And everyone, if you've enjoyed the Fireside podcast, if you've gotten this far into listening, we've covered a lot of stuff this episode. We're coming up to the hour mark. If you've enjoyed listening thus far, Vik and I do this podcast every couple of weeks when we feel like we've got stuff to talk about. And if you want to drop a like, subscribe, or something like that, you know, we're all pretty chill around here. And hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time on the 40k Fireside podcast.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the 40k Fireside podcast. Vik and I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we greatly appreciate any feedback that you can provide after the show.